Welcome back to The Construct and happy Independence Day. Happy birthday, America. Across the country today, millions of people are gathering with their friends and family. There are cookouts and parades, and children are playing with sparklers and waving flags. And we're all celebrating a remarkable political monument in human history, not just the birth of a nation, but the concept and birth of personal freedom. It's one of the very few words that just about every American embraces freedom. We speak of freedom, we fight for freedom, and we teach our children that America is the land of the free. But what if someone today stopped you and asked you straight in the eye, looked at you, and asked one question? Are we still free? Not are we wealthier, or are we the most powerful, or the most technology advanced? Something much simpler. Are we still as free as we believe we are? What does freedom actually mean? And how do we know if we are still protecting it? So, what is freedom? When we think about the American Revolution, we think about the independence from the English monarchy, which is true. That's what happened. But the revolution wasn't simply about replacing one government with another, it was also about rejecting arbitrary power. It was about rejecting unchecked power, rejecting power without accountability, power that was immune from justice, the kind of power that the Supreme Court has recently handed the presidency. Our founding fathers argued that government must exist to protect the personal rights of individuals, rights that we are all born with, not granted by some individual, a monarch. That power must also have limits, and that no person should stand above the law. And America has never perfectly lived up to these ideals yet. History reminds us of that the rights of Native Americans and enslaved Africans and women and many immigrants, many religious individuals, have all been overlooked at some point or another, or maybe still even today. And now, unfortunately, as well, is being questioned by the president and some of the federal courts. For much of our history, freedom has been promised more broadly than it has been practiced. The Declaration of Independence wasn't a declaration of perfection, it was a declaration of aspiration for something greater, a starting point, as I would like to think of it. And now it's been nearly 250 years later, and we're still debating some of those words and that promise that we hold these truths to be self evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, as we celebrate freedom today, the Constitution often speaks of liberty just as much. Similar words, but not quite the same. Freedom is often understood as what we are free to do, and liberty, instead, are the systems that protect our personal freedoms. For example, due process, equal protection, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, checks and balances, and an independent judiciary. These are the systems that are in place to protect our personal freedom. But these aren't just legal concepts, these are the guardrails against arbitrary power and the reminder that the government itself must remain accountable. And that is where liberty can become difficult. Rights don't just prove themselves only when they're protecting just people we agree with. They must prove themselves to be true when they protect people we don't agree with. The Constitution wasn't just written for a few, it was written for everyone. The principles of the Constitution only matter when they are inconvenient because they encompass all of us. So that takes us to my next thought that liberty is a choice. We often speak of liberty as if it were a possession, something that's been handed down to us by history or guaranteed by a flag. But liberty doesn't work that way. It doesn't preserve itself, and it doesn't simply survive because we celebrate it once a year. Liberty must be a deliberate choice, a choice that we make every single day. Not just the choice to defend our own personal freedoms, but the harder choice to defend the freedoms of those that we disagree with. Because liberty that belongs to only a few who look like us, or vote like us, or pray or love like us is not liberty, it's privilege. The true measure of a free society isn't how well it protects the majority, but rather how faithfully it protects the minority, the unpopular, the outsider, the person with the least power, the most vulnerable. And we have not come to a consensus on who that is. And the American experiment continues to unfold. We continue to debate these things. Who counts? Who belongs? Who gets protection? Who does not? Who is entitled to American liberty? And at different moments in our history, that answer has changed. Women, for example, have had to fight for political equality. It's only been 106 years since women have been able to vote, and only about 50 since they've had financial equality, the ability to get a mortgage or a credit card without a husband's or father's signature. Black Americans have had to fight for their personal and civil rights, the rights that were promised in writing but not practiced for 100 years after the end of the Civil War. Black Americans have only been freely voting for 61 years. And gay and lesbian Americans have spent generations seeking equal recognition under the law. And yet, it's only been 11 years since they have been able to freely marry and pursue their own happiness. So today we continue to debate the rights of immigrants, and now, even more recently, the rights of protesters, of journalists, of religious minorities, and transgender Americans. The categories change, but the question remains the same. Do we believe that liberty belongs to everyone, or is it only to some? Every time we make an exception, and every time we allow fear to convince us that someone else's rights are less important than our own, we narrow the meaning of liberty, with one exception at a time, one justification, one group, and eventually, the freedom that we have believed was for everyone and permanent becomes conditional. This Independence Day, perhaps the most patriotic question we can ask is, are we free? Are we choosing to keep liberty broad enough that it belongs to every American, even when that's difficult, even when they look different, speak different, eat, pray, or love differently from us? Liberty has to include everyone, and every generation has to choose it again and again. Most people, I think, imagine that freedom may be lost overnight. And that's how it happens with a coup or a dictator or with tanks in the street. And yes, that has happened in other countries, in other parts of the world. But there are also other stories where freedom and individual rights and liberties change gradually, with one crisis at a time, with an exception or with expansions of new powers to the government, with police or military, perhaps at voting stations or on the streets, or when public spaces suddenly become barred, and with a new crisis, and so on and so forth. And in these moments, sometimes people naturally ask the government to intervene, and sometimes those actions are necessary, and sometimes they even save lives. But constitutional democracies must always ask a second question. When a crisis has passed, will the expanded powers also end? Because we cannot allow for what was once temporary to become permanent. Emergency powers cannot become the ordinary, making institutions and citizens adapt to them. Freedom is rarely lost all at once. It changes and it's diminished, one decision at a time. So I'll leave you with the same question as when we began. Are we still free? I don't think this is a simple yes or no, but we do need to acknowledge that at this moment in time, on this Independence Day, there are movements to remove civil rights away from certain people, to strip birthright citizenship, to take away citizenship from naturalized Americans, to take away marriage equality. There's even the idea to change voting from one person, one vote to one vote, one household, or even to strip it away from women entirely. As the recent gubernatorial candidate for North Carolina said, quote, I absolutely want to go back to an America when women couldn't vote, end quote. Yes, that was said, and that did happen. Freedom isn't just something that America suddenly achieved in 1776, and it's not something that we can't lose sight of. It's something that every generation must continually choose. And not only to defend it from foreign enemies, but by protecting it here at home, by remaining engaged in our communities, by voting, by defending Americans who are under attack for questioning power, by defending the principles even when it's inconvenient, by remembering that liberty belongs to all of us. And eventually, if not, it will belong to none of us. This Independence Day, don't just celebrate freedom. Ask what is required, who receives it, and whether we are strengthening it or simply assuming it will always be there. Freedom is not inherited, it is not guaranteed, it is practiced, and it is protected. Every generation must decide whether the promise of liberty grows stronger or fades away. This has been The Construct, and happy Independence Day, and happy birthday, America. And remember, awareness begins with questions. If you enjoyed the topic today, please subscribe and share this episode with someone you think might find it interesting.